He was about to drink it, his usual nightcap, when I saw it. Just a shadow of something off in his glass. I didn't hesitate. I yelled, "Don't drink it, your wife put something in it." The silence that followed felt like the world had stopped breathing. Maybe you're cooking for someone who never says thank you, or cleaning up while everyone else sleeps. Tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? I promise, today's story will move you. The Mansion Kitchen in Manhattan's Upper East Side was my sanctuary at 5:30 in the morning. Steam rose from my coffee cup like incense, and the first light of dawn painted the marble countertops in shades of gold. I had been here for 9 years, 9 months, and 12 days. Not that anyone was counting. My worn apron hung around my waist like a badge of honor nobody saw, threads fraying at the edges just like my patience. The scent of rising bread filled the air, that yeasty promise of warmth I'd learned to make in my grandmother's Chicago kitchen 40 years ago. But this kitchen, with its $20,000 appliances and imported Italian tiles, felt as cold as a morgue, despite the heat from the ovens. I remember the first day I walked through those heavy oak doors, my hands shaking, not from nerves, but from excitement. The employment agency had called it the opportunity of a lifetime. A millionaire's household, they said. A man who'd made his vast fortune investing in stocks on the stock market, who owned properties from Manhattan to the Hamptons. His wealth seemed endless, built on smart investments and calculated risks that had paid off in ways most people could only dream of. I thought I was stepping into a fairy tale. I thought my cooking would finally be appreciated, that my years of experience would mean something in a house where money was no object. How wrong I was. The first person I met was Mrs. Victoria Ashford, the lady of the house. She was beautiful in that expensive way, every blonde hair perfectly styled, every wrinkle erased by procedures that cost more than most people's annual salaries. She looked me up and down like I was a piece of meat she wasn't sure was fresh enough. "You're Helen," she said, not asked. "I expect perfection, no exceptions, no excuses. My husband's business associates dine here regularly, and his investment portfolio meetings happen over dinner. One mistake could cost him millions in deals." I nodded, eager to please. I wanted to tell her about the little restaurant I'd run in Chicago, how food critics had praised my ability to turn simple ingredients into magic. But she'd already turned away, her heels clicking against the marble like a countdown timer. The millionaire himself, Charles Ashford, was a ghost in his own home. He'd built his fortune through strategic investments in tech stocks and cryptocurrency. There was so much money involved that part of it was even held in Bitcoin and other digital assets. His net worth was discussed in hushed tones by the staff, numbers with so many zeros they seemed fictional. But for all his wealth, he moved through those halls like a man who'd forgotten how to live, how to taste, how to feel grateful for the simplest pleasures. Those early months, I poured my soul into every meal. The roasted chicken I made the way my mother taught me, with herbs from the garden and that perfect golden skin that crackled when you cut into it. The thick beef stew that simmered for hours until the meat fell apart at the touch of a fork. The apple pies with crusts so flaky they melted on your tongue, filling the entire house with the scent of cinnamon and home. I wanted them to taste the love I put into every dish, the care I took with every seasoning, every temperature, every timing. But appreciation? That was rarer than gold in that house. "The sauce is too salty," Mrs. Ashford would announce at dinner parties, her voice carrying just enough volume for the guests to hear. I do apologize. The help isn't what it used to be. The guests would murmur politely while I stood in the kitchen doorway, holding serving dishes, feeling the heat rise to my cheeks, not from the stove, but from shame. "Anyone can brown meat, Helen," Mr. Ashford said once, not even looking up from his financial reports. "It's not exactly rocket science." I wanted to tell him that cooking wasn't just about browning meat. It was about understanding fire and time, about knowing when that sizzle meant perfection and when it meant you'd gone too far. but his eyes were already back on his investment portfolios, calculating profits and dividends while I calculated how to swallow my pride one more time. The worst part wasn't the criticism. It was the invisibility. They spoke about me as if I weren't there, discussed my wages and my mistakes at dinner while I served them. "She's adequate," Mrs. Ashford would say to her friends. "Not exceptional, but adequate. And she's cheap compared to what we could pay." Cheap. As if 9 years of my life, 9 years of getting up before dawn and going to bed after midnight, 9 years of missing my own family gatherings to serve theirs, could be measured in dollars and cents. Do you know what it feels like to be treated as furniture that occasionally burns your dinner? Have you ever stood in a kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of your care and skill, while people who couldn't boil water without instructions tell you you're not good enough? The only light in that cold house was James, Mr. Ashford's grandson. 15 years old, quiet, with eyes too old for his age. While his family studied stock reports and calculated their returns on investment, James found his way to my kitchen. We'd talk while I prepared meals. His slight frame perched on a stool by the prep island, watching my hands work with genuine interest. "Why do you put cinnamon in the tomato sauce?" he asked one evening, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because sometimes the unexpected makes everything better," I told him, stirring the pot slowly. "Your great-grandmother taught me that. She was from Italy, came here with nothing but her recipes and her courage. She said food should tell a story, not just fill a stomach." James would lean forward, hungry for stories that had nothing to do with money or social status. I told him about Chicago, about the little restaurant where everyone knew each other's names and troubles, about how my mother would make soup for sick neighbors without being asked, how food was love in our world, not just fuel. He listened like these stories were treasures, more valuable than all the assets his family accumulated. "I want to learn," he whispered one day. "Will you teach me?" So we began our secret cooking lessons. Nothing fancy, just the basics. How to make pancakes without lumps, how to scramble eggs so they stayed creamy, how to tell when bread was ready by its golden color and hollow sound. These weren't recipes you could find in the expensive cookbook collection his grandmother displayed but never used. These were the kind passed down through generations, measured in handfuls and pinches, perfected through love and practice. But secrets have a way of spilling out like water from a broken cup. Mrs. Ashford found us one afternoon, James and I making chocolate chip cookies from my mother's recipe. Her face went white, then red. Then that dangerous pale that meant someone was about to pay. "What do you think you're doing?" she hissed, grabbing James by the arm. "Filling his head with nonsense. He has tutors for important subjects, not this." She looked at the cookies cooling on the rack like they were contaminated. "Clean this up, all of it. And don't let me catch you corrupting him again with your ideas." James tried to protest, tried to tell her it was his idea, that he'd asked to learn. But she dragged him away, leaving me alone with the warm kitchen and the smell of vanilla that now felt like evidence of a crime. I threw the cookies away, every single one, and scrubbed the counters until my knuckles were raw. But I couldn't scrub away the look in James's eyes as his grandmother pulled him out of my kitchen, out of our little world of shared stories and simple joy. That night I sat in my small room above the garage and wondered if this was what the rest of my life would look like. 9 years had already passed like pages in a sad book. How many more did I have? How much more of my soul could I pour into feeding people who saw me as less than human? But the worst was yet to come. The mansion was preparing for its annual charity gala, one of those glittering events where the wealthy gathered to congratulate themselves on their generosity while eating food that cost more than most people earned in a week. Mrs. Ashford had been planning it for months, every detail scrutinized, every element designed to impress the other millionaires and billionaires who moved in their rarefied circle. "This event brings in major investors," she told me, her voice sharp with warning. Business deals worth millions happen at these gatherings. The food must be absolutely perfect. No room for your usual mediocrity. I had planned a menu that balanced elegance with substance. Seared duck breast with cherry reduction, lobster risotto that required constant stirring, chocolate souffle that demanded perfect timing. These weren't simple dishes. They were architectural marvels of flavor and technique that would have impressed the toughest food critics in Chicago or New York. Then came the announcement that changed everything. "We've hired Chef Marcus Beaumont for the gala," Mrs. Ashford announced with undisguised glee. "He's flown in from Los Angeles especially for us. You've probably seen him on television. He's quite famous. You'll be assisting him, of course." Assisting. After 9 years of crafting every meal in this house, I was being demoted to assistant in my own kitchen. Chef Beaumont arrived like a whirlwind of ego and expensive knives, his every movement calculated for maximum drama. The media followed him, food bloggers and society photographers who hung on his every word while completely ignoring the woman who actually knew where everything was in that kitchen. "This space has potential," he announced, surveying my domain like a general planning a conquest. "We'll need to completely reorganize everything, of course. Start fresh. Clean slate." He moved my spices, rearranged my tools, dismissed my prep work with a wave of his manicured hand. "We don't need yesterday's leftovers cluttering up tomorrow's masterpiece," he said, and I watched months of careful planning go into the garbage disposal. The duck I'd been aging, the stalks I'd been simmering for days, the bread dough I'd been nurturing like a living thing, all of it discarded to make room for his vision. "You can handle the simple tasks," he told me, not bothering to look up from his phone where he was probably posting pictures of the kitchen for his social media followers. "Chopping vegetables, washing dishes, that sort of thing. Leave the real cooking to the professionals." Have you ever been made to feel like a stranger in your own space? Like your years of experience, your accumulated knowledge, your very identity could be erased with a casual insult? I chopped vegetables while he performed for the cameras. I washed dishes while he explained his revolutionary techniques to food writers who scribbled down his every word. I watched him take credit for stocks I'd started, for flavor combinations I'd developed, for the very foundation he was building his show upon. And through it all, I smiled and nodded and said, "Yes, chef," until the words felt like ash in my mouth. The night of the gala arrived like a storm. The mansion filled with Manhattan's elite, men whose investment portfolios could fund small countries, women whose jewelry collections were worth more than most people's homes. The dining room sparkled with crystal and candlelight, millions of dollars worth of assets walking around in designer clothing, discussing business deals over champagne that cost more per bottle than I earned in a month. Chef Beaumont orchestrated the kitchen like a conductor, his staff dancing around him while I remained in the shadows. The forgotten woman who actually knew how to work the complicated oven system, who understood the quirks of every burner and the temperament of every appliance. I watched him struggle with the risotto, saw him overcook the duck, noticed the slight panic in his eyes when the soufflés began to fall. But I said nothing. He'd wanted to be the star. Let him shine or burn on his own. Then came the moment that changed everything. I was cleaning prep bowls, staying out of the way as requested, when I noticed Mrs. Ashford in the butler's pantry. She was preparing Mr. Ashford's usual nightcap, a brandy he took every evening in his study while reviewing the day's stock market reports. But tonight, something was different. Her hands shook slightly as she opened a small envelope and poured white powder into the crystal glass. She stirred it quickly, then added the brandy, swirling it until the powder dissolved completely. My blood turned to ice. I'd seen that powder before, in my grandmother's medicine cabinet. She'd used it to help her sleep during the worst nights of her illness. But Mrs. Ashford was adding far too much, enough to do more than help someone sleep, enough to make someone very, very sick. I watched her take the glass toward the study where her husband waited, his evening ritual as predictable as sunrise. She moved with purpose, her face set in lines I'd never seen before, not the casual cruelty she usually wore, but something darker, more desperate. As she approached the study door, I made a decision that would change all our lives forever. "Stop!" I shouted, running after her. "Don't let him drink that!" She whirled around, the glass still in her hand, her face a mask of shocked anger. "How dare you—" "There's something in it," I said, my voice carrying through the hallway. "I saw you put something in his drink." Mr. Ashford appeared in the study doorway, drawn by my shouting. The party guests had begun to gather, their conversations dying as they sensed drama unfolding. Chef Beaumont emerged from the kitchen, his perfectly styled hair slightly disheveled from the heat of service. "What's going on?" Mr. Ashford demanded, his eyes moving between his wife's pale face and the glass in her trembling hand. Mrs. Ashford's composure cracked like eggshell. "She's lying," she hissed, but her voice wavered. She's been stealing, going through our private things. She's trying to cause trouble because we hired a real chef." But it was too late. Mr. Ashford had seen the fear in her eyes, the guilt written across her features like words on a page. He took the glass from her unresisting fingers and held it up to the light. Even I could see the slight cloudiness, the residue that hadn't quite dissolved. "Victoria," he said quietly, and in that single word was the weight of 23 years of marriage, millions of dollars in shared assets, and a trust that had just shattered like crystal on marble. The room erupted in whispers and gasps. The wealthy guests who'd come to eat and network and discuss their investment portfolios suddenly found themselves witnessing a scandal that would be talked about in their circles for years. Camera phones appeared, social media posts began to spread, and Mrs. Bates Ashford's carefully constructed world began to collapse around her, like a house of cards in a hurricane. "Call the police," someone whispered. "Is there a doctor here?" "What was in the drink?" Mrs. Ashford's eyes found mine across the chaos, and in them I saw something I'd never expected. Not just anger or embarrassment, but a kind of broken desperation that spoke of deeper pain than I'd ever imagined. "You've ruined everything," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the commotion. "Everything." The police arrived within minutes, Manhattan's finest responding to a domestic disturbance at one of the most prestigious addresses in the city. They took statements, collected evidence, and asked questions that peeled back layers of a family's secrets, like an onion. The party ended in chaos, wealthy guests scattering like startled birds. Their evening of networking and socializing transformed into something that would require damage control and carefully worded explanations. Chef Beaumont disappeared back to Los Angeles, his television appearances suddenly canceled, his social media accounts going dark. The kitchen returned to me by default, though now it felt different, charged with the electricity of trauma and revelation. But the real story was only beginning to unfold. In the days that followed, as lawyers arrived with their briefcases and serious faces, as reporters called and social media buzzed with speculation, the truth began to emerge piece by piece, like a puzzle assembling itself. Mrs. Ashford had been slowly poisoning her husband for months, adding small amounts of sleeping medication to his evening drinks. Not enough to kill him, but enough to make him confused, forgetful, dependent on her guidance for important business decisions. She'd been siphoning money from their joint accounts, moving assets to offshore investments he'd never approved. Her own secret portfolio had grown to include cryptocurrency investments and stock market positions worth millions of dollars. She'd been planning, she later confessed, to have him declared mentally incompetent so she could take control of his vast fortune entirely. The charity gala was supposed to be her final move, a larger dose that would put him in the hospital, providing cover for her to claim he'd had a breakdown from stress. I had stopped a theft worth hundreds of millions of dollars with a single shout, but in that moment, standing in the hallway with everyone staring at me, I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a woman who'd just watched a family destroy itself, who'd seen behind the curtain of wealth and found the same ugly human frailties that existed everywhere else. Money, I realized, couldn't buy happiness or honesty or love. It could only amplify what was already there, and sometimes what was there was very, very dark. Mr. Ashford looked at me across the wreckage of his evening, his marriage, his trust. "You saved my life," he said simply. I nodded, not knowing what else to do. "I couldn't let her hurt you," I said. "No matter what else has happened between us, I couldn't stand by and watch that." And that's when something shifted in his eyes. For the first time in 9 years, Charles Ashford really saw me. Not as the help, not as furniture that occasionally burned dinner, but as a human being who'd put his welfare above her own comfort and safety. The recognition was overwhelming, like sunlight after years of shadow. "I don't even know your last name," he whispered, and in that admission was the knowledge of how badly he'd failed as an employer and as a human being. "It's Martinez," I told him. "Helen Martinez. I've been cooking for your family for 9 years, 9 months, and 12 days. He closed his eyes and nodded, shame written across his features like scars. When he opened them again, they were wet with tears I'd never imagined he could shed. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so very sorry." The legal proceedings that followed were swift and brutal. Mrs. Ashford's assets were frozen while investigators traced the money she'd stolen. Her cryptocurrency accounts were seized, her stock investments halted, her carefully planned financial empire crumbling like sand. The divorce lawyers circled like sharks, and the society pages that had once celebrated her charity work now dissected her crimes with gleeful precision. Through it all, I continued to cook, not because anyone asked me to, but because it's what I do. It's who I am. I made simple meals for Mr. Ashford, who seemed to have forgotten how to eat anything that didn't taste like guilt. I cooked for James, who spent most of his time in his room trying to understand how the grandmother he'd loved could have done something so terrible to his grandfather. "Is it my fault?" he asked me one evening, standing in the kitchen doorway like a lost child. "If I hadn't been learning to cook with you, maybe she wouldn't have been so angry. Maybe none of this would have happened." I stopped stirring the soup I was making, chicken noodle, simple and comforting, and looked at this boy who'd become like a grandson to me. "James," I said gently, "your grandmother's choices had nothing to do with you or me or cooking. She made those choices because she was hurting in ways we probably can't understand. But that doesn't make them your fault or my fault. It makes them her responsibility." He nodded, but I could see the weight he was carrying, the way children always blame themselves for adult failures. "Will you teach me to make that soup?" he asked quietly. And so we began again, quietly, carefully. Not cooking lessons this time, but healing sessions. We chopped vegetables and talked about anger and disappointment and forgiveness. We simmered broths and discussed trust and family and the courage it takes to do the right thing even when it's scary. The kitchen became our therapy room, the stove our altar, the shared meals our communion. Mr. Ashford began joining us sometimes, at first just watching, then gradually participating. His hands were clumsy with knife work, uncertain with seasonings, but he approached cooking the way he'd once approached his investments, with careful attention and growing confidence. "I never realized," he said one evening as we made pasta from scratch, "how much skill this takes, how much love." The word hung in the air between us like a bridge we might all cross together. Months passed. The scandal faded from the headlines, but not from our hearts. Mrs. Quayle Ashford was sentenced to several years in prison for attempted murder and financial fraud. The house felt different without her presence, still cold in many ways, but no longer cruel. The casual cruelty that had been our daily bread was gone, replaced by something I'd never expected to find in that marble palace: respect. Mr. Ashford began consulting with me about meals, asking my opinion, thanking me for my work. Not the empty politeness of social obligation, but genuine gratitude from someone who'd learned the difference between service and servitude. He increased my salary, not because I asked, but because he'd finally calculated what my work was actually worth. He gave me full authority over the kitchen again, trusting my judgment about menus and ingredients and timing. But more than that, he began to see me as a person with a story, with dreams and disappointments and wisdom earned through experience. We'd talk sometimes while I prepared dinner, conversations that ranged from his business concerns to my memories of Chicago, from James's future to my own hopes for retirement someday. "What would you do if you could do anything?" he asked one evening, watching me roll out pie crust with the kind of easy precision that comes from decades of practice. I thought about it while my hands worked, the familiar rhythm of the rolling pin like meditation. "I'd open a little restaurant," I said finally. "Nothing fancy, just good food, honest prices, the kind of place where people feel welcome regardless of how much money they have in the bank." He nodded slowly. "Tell me more about this restaurant." So I did. I told him about my vision of a neighborhood place with mismatched chairs and flowers on every table, where the menu would change based on what was fresh and seasonal, where the prices would be fair and the portions generous. I described the kitchen I'd want, not as grand as his, but warm and efficient, and filled with the laughter of cooks who loved their work. I talked about hiring people like me, people who'd been overlooked and undervalued, giving them a chance to show what they could do when respected and supported. "How much would something like that cost?" he asked quietly. The question surprised me. "I don't know," I admitted. "I've never had enough money to seriously consider it. Between sending money to my sister in Chicago and saving for retirement, I've never been able to put aside the kind of capital something like that would require." He was quiet for a long time after that, watching me work with an expression I couldn't read. Later that night, after James had gone to bed and the house had settled into its evening quiet, he knocked on my door. "I have a proposition," he said, his businessman's voice careful and formal. "An investment opportunity, you might say." I invited him into my small sitting room above the garage, the space that had been my refuge for nearly a decade. It was modest but comfortable, filled with books and plants and photographs of the family I'd left behind in Chicago. He looked around as if seeing it for the first time, which he probably was. "I'd like to invest in your restaurant," he said without preamble, "as a silent partner. You'd have complete creative control, full authority over all decisions. I'd provide the initial capital and ongoing support, but it would be your business, your vision, your success." I stared at him, certain I'd misunderstood. "Mr. Ashford, I can't accept—" "Charles," he interrupted gently, "after everything we've been through, I think we can use first names. And you can accept this, Helen. It's not charity. It's an investment. I believe in your abilities, your vision, your integrity. I believe you could build something wonderful, something that would be both financially successful and genuinely meaningful. Let me help you do it." The offer was overwhelming, generous beyond anything I dared to imagine. But it was also terrifying. To accept would mean leaving the security of steady employment, risking everything on an untested dream. To refuse would mean staying safe, but perhaps always wondering what might have been. "Why?" I asked finally. "Why would you do this for me?" His answer was simple and devastating in its honesty. "Because you saved my life. Because you showed me what real loyalty looks like. Because in 9 years of working in my home, you never once compromised your integrity, even when I gave you every reason to. Because you deserve a chance to build something of your own, and I want to be part of making that possible." He paused, looking out my small window at the lights of Manhattan gleaming in the darkness. "And because I've learned that the best investments aren't always in stocks and bonds and cryptocurrency. Sometimes they're in people. Sometimes they're in dreams that make the world a little bit better." I thought about it for 3 days. weighing the risks and possibilities, consulting with James, who was thrilled at the prospect, calling my sister in Chicago, who screamed with excitement so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. In the end, the decision came down to a simple question. Did I want to spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been? Or did I want to find out what I was truly capable of when given the chance? We found the perfect space in Brooklyn, in a neighborhood where young families mixed with elderly immigrants, where gentrification hadn't yet erased all the character and diversity that makes New York special. It was a former bakery with wide windows and good light, a kitchen that needed updating but had good bones, and rent that wouldn't require us to charge Manhattan prices for Brooklyn hearts. The renovation took 6 months, and I was involved in every decision from the placement of electrical outlets to the color of paint on the walls. Charles, I struggled to call him that at first, then gradually learned to appreciate the equality it implied, was true to his word about creative control. He asked questions, offered suggestions, but never demanded or insisted. When contractors tried to charge us more than agreed, he handled the negotiations with the same skill he'd brought to his investment portfolio. When permits got tangled in city bureaucracy, his lawyers untangled them with impressive efficiency. But mostly, he stayed in the background, letting me build something that was truly mine. I hired carefully, looking not just for skills but for heart. Maria, who'd been cleaning houses for 20 years while dreaming of working in a real kitchen. David, a culinary school graduate who couldn't afford to work for free at trendy restaurants but could cook circles around most celebrity chefs. Susan, a baker whose arthritis had forced her to give up her own shop but who could still create pastries that brought tears to your eyes. We trained together, planned menus together, argued about seasoning and technique and presentation until we found our rhythm. Not the military precision of high-end establishments, but the warm efficiency of a family kitchen where everyone knows their role and takes pride in the whole. James spent his school breaks with us, learning not just to cook but to understand the business of food, ordering and inventory, cost control and customer service, the delicate balance between quality and affordability that makes or breaks neighborhood restaurants. He absorbed it all with the intensity he'd once brought to our secret cooking lessons, but now with the confidence of someone who belonged. "I want to work here when I graduate," he announced one day while prepping vegetables for the lunch service. "Your grandfather expects you to join the family business," I reminded him. "Investment management, financial planning, building on the fortune he's accumulated." James looked at me with eyes that reminded me suddenly of his grandfather's, but warmer, more vulnerable. "This is the family business now," he said simply. "Isn't it?" The words hit me with unexpected force. Family business. Not because we shared blood, but because we'd chosen each other, supported each other, built something together that was greater than any of us individually. We opened on a Thursday in October. No grand announcement or celebrity fanfare, just a small sign in the window and word of mouth spreading through the neighborhood like the warmth from our ovens. The first customer was Mrs. Chen from the laundromat next door, ordering soup to go for her lunch break. The second was a young father with twin toddlers, grateful to find a place with high chairs and patience for small messes. By Saturday, there was a line out the door. The food spoke for itself, simple, honest, made with care and served with warmth. The prices were fair, the portions generous, the atmosphere welcoming to everyone from construction workers grabbing quick lunches to elderly couples celebrating anniversaries. We became what I'd always dreamed of, a place where food brought people together, where everyone felt valued and welcome regardless of their bank balance or social status. The reviews started coming within weeks, not from fancy food magazines, but from neighborhood blogs and local newspapers, from customers who posted pictures on social media and recommended us to friends. "This is what good food tastes like," one wrote, "like someone who cares made it for someone they love." That review made me cry. Charles visited regularly, sometimes with business associates who were impressed by the quality and authenticity of the food. Sometimes alone, sitting at the counter and watching the controlled chaos of a working kitchen with obvious satisfaction. He never used his connection to me for social credit or business advantage, never treated the restaurant as his trophy or toy. He was simply a proud investor watching his belief in someone prove itself correct. "You've exceeded every projection," he told me one evening after the last customer had left and we were cleaning up for the night. "Not just financially, though the profit margins are excellent, but in terms of community impact, employee satisfaction, customer loyalty. You've built something really special here." I looked around the dining room with its mismatched chairs and fresh flowers, at the kitchen where my staff was finishing the evening cleanup with the easy banter of people who genuinely enjoyed working together, at the bulletin board by the door where customers had posted thank you notes and photos and announcements of neighborhood events. "It feels like home," I said. "That's exactly what it is," he agreed. "Home for everyone who enters it." The success brought opportunities I'd never anticipated. Food writers wanted to interview me. Cooking shows invited me to appear. Other investors approached with offers to expand or franchise. I turned them all down, preferring to focus on perfecting what we'd already built rather than diluting it through rapid growth. "Success isn't just about accumulating wealth," I explained to a reporter who couldn't understand why I wasn't eager to capitalize on our popularity. "It's about creating something meaningful, something sustainable, something that enriches the lives of everyone it touches. We're not trying to build an empire here. We're trying to build a community gathering place that will still be here in 20 years, still serving good food to people who appreciate it." The reporter looked puzzled, clearly uncomfortable with my rejection of traditional business ambition. In her world, success was measured purely in dollars and expansion, in stock options and acquisition offers. The idea that someone might define success differently, might prioritize stability and community impact over maximum profit, seemed foreign to her. But I'd learned something important during my years in that cold mansion kitchen. Money can amplify what's already there, but it can't create what's missing. No amount of wealth had made the Ashford family happy or kind or grateful before their crisis forced them to confront what really mattered. What brought them together in the end wasn't their investment portfolio or their real estate holdings. It was shared meals, honest conversation, and the recognition that everyone at the table deserved respect and consideration. That's what we were serving in our little restaurant. Respect and consideration, along with well-prepared food. It was what had been missing from my life for so many years, what I'd hungered for even more than recognition or financial security. The knowledge that my work mattered, that my experience had value, that I deserved basic human dignity regardless of my job title or income level. On our first anniversary, we threw a party that filled the restaurant and spilled out onto the sidewalk. Customers brought friends, employees brought family, neighbors brought potluck dishes that complemented rather than competed with our menu. Charles made a short speech about the importance of investing in people rather than just portfolios, about the returns that can't be measured in dollars but matter more than those that can. James, now 17 and working with us every weekend and school break, stood beside me as we cut the anniversary cake Susan had made, 3 layers of chocolate with perfect buttercream frosting, decorated with edible flowers from the community garden down the block. "Thank you," he whispered, just loud enough for me to hear over the crowd's applause, "for saving us. All of us." I looked around at the faces surrounding us. Customers who'd become friends, employees who'd become family, neighbors who'd found a place to belong. Charles standing at the edge of the crowd with tears in his eyes, no longer the cold millionaire I'd once served, but a man who'd learned to value warmth over wealth. Mrs. Chen from the laundromat, who'd taught me to make proper dumplings in exchange for my grandmother's recipe for chicken soup. David, explaining knife techniques to a group of teenage customers who hung on his every word with the same attention James had once given my cooking lessons. This was what I'd unknowingly been working toward all those years, through the dismissals and the disrespect and the grinding daily humiliation of being treated as less than human. Not revenge against those who'd wronged me, not even recognition for my skills and dedication, but this, a place where I belonged, where my gifts were appreciated, where I could offer others the dignity and respect I'd been denied for so long. The restaurant's success continued to grow, but in measured ways that enhanced rather than overwhelmed our original mission. We added a weekend brunch service that attracted families from across Brooklyn. We started a catering business that employed 3 additional people and served the kind of community events that brought neighbors together. We partnered with the local school to provide cooking classes for students whose families couldn't afford expensive culinary programs. But the most meaningful development came 2 years after opening, when Mrs. Ashford was released from prison. I hadn't expected her to contact me. The woman who'd once dismissed me as adequate and cheap, who'd tried to frame me for crimes she was committing, who'd treated me like furniture for nearly a decade, called the restaurant on a Tuesday afternoon when we were closed for our weekly deep cleaning. "This is Victoria Ashford," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I was hoping, could I speak with you? In person, I mean, if you're willing. The request caught me completely off guard. I'd occasionally wondered what had become of her during the legal proceedings and subsequent imprisonment, but I'd assumed that chapter of all our lives was permanently closed. The idea of facing her again brought back memories of humiliation and fear I thought I'd successfully processed and moved past. But there was something in her voice, not the imperious command I remembered, but a brokenness that spoke to the part of me that recognized suffering regardless of its source. We met at a small coffee shop in Manhattan, neutral territory where neither of us held the advantage of familiarity. She looked older than her years. Her expensively maintained appearance replaced by the kind of tired authenticity that comes from surviving genuine hardship. Her clothes were clean but inexpensive, her hair simply styled, her face bare of makeup that had once perfect mask of privilege and cruelty. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she said as we sat across from each other at a small table near the window. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure I would either," I admitted. "Why did you want to meet?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup as if searching for words she'd never learned to say. "I wanted to apologize," she said finally, "not because my lawyer advised it or because it might help with my parole or any other legal reason, because I need you to know that I understand now how terribly I treated you, how wrong I was, how much damage I caused." The apology was unexpected and overwhelming. During all those years of mistreatment, I'd fantasized about hearing these words, imagining the satisfaction they would bring. But sitting there, with this broken woman who'd lost everything, her marriage, her freedom, her social status, her sense of self, I felt not satisfaction but sadness for all of us who'd been trapped in that cycle of power and humiliation. "Why?" I asked. "Why did you treat me the way you did?" She was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Because I was so afraid," she whispered. "Afraid that Charles didn't really love me, that he'd leave me for someone younger or prettier or more interesting. Afraid that I had nothing to offer except my appearance and social connections. Afraid that if I lost his money, I'd have nothing left at all." She looked up at me with eyes that held a different kind of vulnerability than I'd ever seen from her. "You were everything I wasn't. You had skills, real abilities that created something meaningful. You had integrity and strength and purpose that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or support. I was jealous of that, and my jealousy made me cruel. I thought if I could diminish you, it would somehow make me more important, more valuable." The confession was raw and honest in a way that caught me completely unprepared. The woman I'd seen as purely cruel, as someone incapable of empathy or self-reflection, was revealing depths of insecurity and pain I'd never imagined. It didn't excuse her behavior, but it provided context that made her actions feel human rather than monstrous. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she continued. "I know I don't deserve it. I just needed you to know that my treatment of you had nothing to do with your worth or your abilities or your character. It had everything to do with my own fear and emptiness. You deserved so much better than the way I treated you." We sat in silence for a while, two women who'd shared a house for nearly a decade but had never really known each other until this moment of brutal honesty. I thought about forgiveness, about the weight of carrying anger and resentment, about the difference between forgetting and moving forward. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said finally. "Not completely, not all at once. But I can tell you that holding on to anger about the past has only hurt me. What you did was wrong, but it's over now. We both have different lives, different chances to do better." She nodded, tears running down her cheeks unchecked. "I've been taking classes in prison," she said. "Cooking classes, actually. Basic ones for people who've never learned to prepare their own food. The irony wasn't lost on me. Learning to do what I watched you do effortlessly for so many years while treating you like it was worthless." The image of Victoria Ashford standing in a prison kitchen, learning to scramble eggs or boil pasta, struggling with skills I'd been developing since childhood, was both poignant and surreal. "How was it?" I asked. A small smile crossed her face, the first genuine expression I'd ever seen from her. "Humbling," she said, "and surprisingly satisfying. There's something about creating nourishment with your own hands that I never understood before. Something about the care required, the attention to detail, the way small choices affect the final result." She paused. "I understand now why you put so much of yourself into every meal. I wish I'd appreciated it then." Before we parted, she asked about the restaurant, about James, about Charles. I told her about our success, about the community we'd built, about the satisfaction of work that felt meaningful rather than merely necessary. I told her about James's plans to study both business and culinary arts, about Charles's transformation from remote employer to genuine friend and partner. "He's lucky to have found you again," she said. "Both of them are. You saved that family in more ways than just preventing me from poisoning him. You showed them what real value looks like, what genuine care and commitment mean." As I walked back to Brooklyn that evening, I felt a strange sense of completion, not because her apology had erased the pain of those years, but because it had provided the final piece of understanding I needed to fully move forward. The woman who'd made my life miserable for so long was herself a victim of the same system that had devalued my contributions, a system that taught us to find our worth through others' approval rather than our own authentic abilities and character. The restaurant continued to thrive, becoming even more deeply embedded in the fabric of our neighborhood. We survived the challenges that close many small businesses, rent increases, supply chain disruptions, economic downturns, even a brief closure during a health crisis that forced us to reinvent our entire service model virtually overnight. Each challenge we met with creativity and community support, adapting without losing the essential character that made us special. James graduated from high school and chose to spend a gap year working with us full-time before starting college. His energy and fresh perspectives pushed us to innovate, while his deep understanding of our values kept us grounded in our original mission. Watching him grow into a thoughtful leader who could manage both the business and human aspects of our work filled me with pride that felt almost parental. Charles, now in his early 70s, gradually stepped back from active management of his investment portfolio to spend more time at the restaurant and with James. The experience of almost losing everything had taught him to value relationships over returns, presence over productivity. He became a regular fixture at our counter during lunch service, engaging customers in conversation and helping with whatever tasks needed attention. "I thought success meant accumulating as much wealth as possible," he told me one afternoon as we planned the menu for a private party. "Now I understand it means building something that lasts, something that makes the world a little better, something that brings joy to the people it touches. This restaurant has taught me more about real success than 40 years of finance ever did." 5 years after opening, we faced our biggest decision yet. A national restaurant group offered to buy us for an amount that would set everyone involved up for life. The offer included guarantees about maintaining our current staff and general approach, but it would mean giving up direct control over the daily decisions that shaped our character. We discussed it as a team, all the employees, Charles, James, and I, sitting around a table after hours, weighing the financial security against the autonomy that had made our success possible. The money was tempting, enough to ensure everyone's retirement and James's education without debt. But as we talked, it became clear that what we'd built was worth more than what they were offering to pay. "Money can't buy what we have here," Maria said, speaking for all of us. "The relationships, the trust, the feeling that what we do matters. That's not something you can purchase or franchise or replicate in other locations. That's something you build over time with care and commitment." We turned down the offer and celebrated with a staff dinner that felt like a family reunion. The decision felt right in ways that had nothing to do with financial analysis and everything to do with understanding what really mattered to each of us. The years that followed brought steady growth and recognition, but always within the context of our commitment to community and quality over maximum profit. Food magazines finally discovered us, writing glowing reviews that brought tourists from Manhattan and beyond. But we never let external attention change our focus on serving our neighbors with respect and excellent food at fair prices. James graduated from college with degrees in both business administration and culinary arts, bringing back ideas and energy that helped us refine our operations while staying true to our mission. He implemented new systems for inventory management and cost control, introduced innovative menu items that reflected both traditional techniques and contemporary tastes, and began developing plans for a cookbook that would share not just our recipes, but the stories and values behind them. "The cookbook isn't just about food," he explained to a publisher who was interested in the project. "It's about dignity, respect, second chances, and the way good meals can bring people together, regardless of their backgrounds or bank balances. Every recipe comes with a story about the person who inspired it or perfected it, because food is always about more than just ingredients and technique." Charles continued his gradual transition from financial maven to restaurant elder, bringing his analytical skills to bear on problems while respecting the creative and humanistic aspects of our work that couldn't be reduced to spreadsheets. His investment in our restaurant had paid dividends he'd never anticipated, not just financially, though we'd been consistently profitable, but in terms of personal fulfillment and community impact. "This was the best investment I ever made," he told me on our 7th anniversary, looking around at the packed dining room where 3 generations of families shared tables with young couples on dates and elderly friends catching up over coffee. Not because of the financial returns, though those have been excellent, but because it generated so much goodness in the world. It created jobs, built community, fed people both literally and emotionally, and proved that business success and human values don't have to be mutually exclusive. One evening in our 8th year, as I was preparing for the next day's service, I found myself thinking about all the paths that had brought me to this moment. The years of struggle and humiliation in that mansion kitchen had been painful, but they'd also been necessary preparation for recognizing and seizing the opportunity when it finally came. Without experiencing the casual cruelty of being treated as less than human, I might not have appreciated the profound gift of respect and recognition when they were offered. The woman I was now, confident, successful, surrounded by people who valued my contributions, had been forged in the fires of those difficult years. Every dismissive comment, every cruel observation, every moment of being treated as invisible had strengthened my resolve to create something better, not just for myself, but for everyone who worked with me. My staff knew they were valued not just for their labor, but for their ideas, their contributions to our collective mission, their growth as professionals and human beings. The young cooks who worked for us received the mentoring and respect I'd been denied, learning not just techniques, but the dignity that should accompany any honest work well done. As I stood in the kitchen that had become the center of my world, surrounded by the tools and ingredients of my trade, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with money or recognition and everything to do with purpose. This was what I'd been working toward all my life. Not just a successful business, but a place where good food and human dignity came together to create something greater than the sum of its parts. The restaurant had become more than a business. It was a testament to the power of second chances, the importance of treating everyone with respect, regardless of their social status, and the way shared meals could build bridges between different communities and generations. It was proof that success didn't have to come at the expense of others, that prosperity could be built on a foundation of fairness and mutual support, rather than exploitation and hierarchy. James. Now 25 and effectively managing day-to-day operations while I focused on menu development and long-term planning, often brought friends from college to eat with us. They were invariably impressed not just by the quality of the food, but by the atmosphere of respect and warmth that pervaded every aspect of our operation. "This is how business should work," one of them commented after spending an evening with us during a particularly busy weekend service. Everyone working together toward a common goal, everyone's contributions valued, success shared rather than hoarded. It's like a master class in ethical entrepreneurship. Those words meant more to me than any review in a prestigious food magazine or recognition from industry organizations. We had proven that it was possible to build something profitable and sustainable while honoring the humanity and dignity of everyone involved in the process. The neighborhood around us continued to evolve, but we remained a constant presence, adapting to changes while maintaining our core mission. New residents discovered us and became regulars. Longtime customers brought their children and grandchildren to share meals that had been part of their family traditions for years. We had become woven into the fabric of the community in ways that made us not just a business, but a cultural institution. Mrs. Chen retired from the laundromat and began helping us with prep work several mornings a week, teaching our younger staff traditional techniques for dumpling making and noodle preparation, while learning about fusion approaches that honored traditional methods within contemporary presentations. Her presence added another layer to our story, the way different cultures and generations could enrich each other through the universal language of well-prepared food. Charles, now in his mid-70s, began writing his own memoir about the lessons he'd learned from nearly losing everything and discovering what really mattered in life. His book would chronicle not just the financial aspects of his near downfall, but the human dimensions of trust, betrayal, forgiveness, and redemption that had shaped all our lives during those transformative years. The most valuable lesson, he wrote in a draft chapter he showed me, was that wealth without wisdom is ultimately worthless, and wisdom often comes from the people we least expect to teach us. Helen didn't just save my life that night. She saved my soul by showing me what real integrity looks like and what genuine success feels like. Reading those words, I was struck again by how much we had all changed from the people we'd been in that cold mansion. The scared cook who'd been afraid to speak up for herself had become a confident businesswoman who advocated for fair wages and respectful treatment throughout the industry. The remote millionaire who'd viewed employees as human resources had become a mentor and advocate who used his influence to support other small businesses and community development projects. The confused teenager who'd been searching for purpose had become a thoughtful young adult with the skills and values needed to carry our mission forward into the future. As I approach my 65th birthday, I find myself reflecting on the unpredictable path that brought me to this place of satisfaction and success. The woman who once stood invisible in a kitchen where her contributions went unnoticed now leads a team of dedicated professionals who see their work as both craft and calling. The cook who was once dismissed as adequate now trains young chefs who go on to open their own restaurants, carrying forward the values of respect, quality, and community service. The little girl who learned to cook at her grandmother's side in Chicago could never have imagined that those early lessons would eventually bloom into a business that employs dozens of people, feeds hundreds of families each week, and stands as proof that the American dream is still achievable for those willing to work hard and treat others with dignity. But perhaps the most meaningful transformation has been in my understanding of what success really means. It's not about accumulating wealth or achieving fame or earning recognition from prestigious institutions. Success is about creating something meaningful that enriches the lives of everyone it touches, building relationships based on mutual respect and shared values, and using whatever abilities you have to make the world a little bit better than you found it. Every morning when I arrive at the restaurant and see the lights coming on in the kitchen, when I hear the laughter and conversation of my staff preparing for another day of service, when I smell the bread rising and the stock simmering and all the other aromas that mean home and nourishment and care, I am reminded that this is what I was meant to do with my life. Not just cooking, though I still love the alchemy of turning simple ingredients into something that brings joy to people's faces, but creating a place where everyone who enters, whether as a customer or employee, is treated with the respect and consideration they deserve simply by virtue of being human. Building something that will outlast my own involvement, that will continue serving the community long after I retire to my little apartment above the restaurant where I can still smell the dinner service and hear the satisfied conversations of well-fed neighbors. The circle that began that night with Victoria's glass of poisoned brandy has completed itself in ways none of us could have anticipated. What started as an act of basic human decency, refusing to let someone be harmed when I had the power to prevent it, opened possibilities that transformed not just my own life, but the lives of everyone connected to our story. James will take over full management of the restaurant within the next few years, bringing his own vision while honoring the values and traditions we've established together. Charles has established a foundation that provides interest-free loans to working-class people who want to start their own small businesses, paying forward the investment in human potential that changed my life. Even Victoria, in her own way, has found redemption through her work with a nonprofit organization that provides job training and support services to formerly incarcerated women, using her own experience of falling and rising again to help others rebuild their lives. As for me, I will continue doing what I've always done, cooking with love, treating people with respect, and proving every day that the most revolutionary act in a world that often seems to have forgotten basic decency is simply to recognize the worth and dignity of every person who crosses your path. Tonight, as I finish preparing tomorrow's specials and turn off the lights in the kitchen I've come to love so much, I think about that confused, frightened woman who once stood in a Manhattan mansion kitchen, wondering if she would ever find a place where her gifts were truly valued. She couldn't have imagined that her answer would come through a moment of moral courage that seemed so small at the time, but contained within it the seeds of transformation for everyone involved. The story that began with a shout across a hallway has become a legacy of second chances, mutual respect, and the profound truth that success means nothing if it comes at the expense of your humanity or the humanity of others. It has become proof that the real recipes for a meaningful life cannot be measured in cups and teaspoons, but in the portions of kindness, dignity, and love we bring to everything we do. And that, I believe, is a story worth sharing, a lesson worth learning, and a legacy worth leaving for the next generation of dreamers who dare to believe that the world can be made better, one meal, one relationship, one act of decency at a time.